This is Secret Stories, and my name is Mary Cachapalia. Many people cannot be on camera because their employer, their family, their friends, their church, or their synagogue would roll their eyes, ridicule, misunderstand, or even fire them. Secret Stories allow you to tell your story with anonymity. Here I read experiencers' accounts emailed to us at Breaking the Silence. Thank you for supporting us through YouTube membership or Patreon. Your support helps all of us break the silence. This account is by a gentleman who wants to be known as a fellow traveler. For over 66 years, I have lived with the gradual unfolding mystery of what began in 1958 in a small town in upstate New York on a non-working and mostly abandoned farm. My early memories of these strange encounters are a mixture of paralyzing fear, extraordinary ecstatic beauty, overwhelming spiritual intensity, wonderment, and revelation, seen through the eyes of a 4-year-old child. At such a young age, I had great difficulty weaving together the seemingly disparate threads of these experiences into a coherent and connected perspective. The experiences connected to so many broader elements, which at the same time initially unrelated to one another. Consequently, it took me many years to begin to connect these pieces into a more cohesive whole, allowing me to better understand the diversity and nature of these experiences, which were in fact all connected back to the genesis of that single point. In those early years, initially, we did not have television in the home, and I only have a vague memory of a radio, although it was listened to infrequently. We did have a Victrola for playing records, and that seemed to be the extent of the technology in our home at that time. Since then, there have been dozens of unexplained encounters, each manifesting in a unique way. Although seen from a broader perspective, they form a pattern of communication. Like my first early experiences, they are an unusual mixture of different experimental modalities, sometimes accompanied by diametrically opposing emotional reactions. However, recently, there have been a marked change. There seems to have been a ramping up of frequency, intensity, and quality of the visits. Although the intensity is no longer accompanied by some of the more fear-based responses that I have experienced in the past. This may be because of my own interpretation and integration of the phenomena and subsequent ability to handle it in a way which does not trigger the responses it did when I was very young. It could also be due to the fact that the visitors are becoming more sensitive to how they communicate, not only with me, but with the human species in general. Perhaps they are also evolving and undergoing a growing recognition that there is a more productive way to form a meaningful alliance with the people of this planet, which does not have to engender anxiety, fear, or a fight or flight response, but which instead represents more of an alliance. I can only speak personally because I know there remains an enormously wide range of response which these encounters generate, regardless of what level of contact there appears to be. A few months ago, I was extremely sick with COVID and battled it for 2 long months. During that time, I understood how, left untreated, this could finish off some people whose immune system might be even more susceptible to the virulence of this virus. Somewhere in the middle of this unpleasant and protracted encounter with COVID, I received a visitation, waking up part way through. To this day, it is hard to tell if this is the beginning of an encounter or the end of one when they are putting you back, which sometimes can be physically and psychologically distressing. In the middle of the usual paralysis, I sensed that several of them were standing in the room, 5 to be precise. At that moment, I just felt fed up with the intrusion, which never seems to follow any predictable pattern, location, or context. I still did not feel well at all, and with my body being physically exhausted from trying to recover from the virus, it felt like I spoke, but probably not out loud. I know that usually one is unable to even move their mouth or make any sound, but I telepathically and emphatically said to them, "No, not now." It felt like the first time I was able to muster an articulate and angry response to them. Nonetheless, it has to be said that I genuinely do appreciate how my life has been greatly enhanced over so many years and in many different ways, despite the different and difficult learning curve and disorienting, unpredictable moments when these visitations occur. However, this particular night, I was just not in the mood to deal with any of it in such a weakened state. To my astonishment, they appeared to immediately understand and responded accordingly, releasing control of my body back to me. This was completely surprising because I discovered in that moment that I had far more power in this situation than I had previously ever imagined. I got out of bed and thanked them, and that marked the beginning of a complete shift in my relationship to them. It began to feel more equal, and that there was some effort on their part to establish an alliance with me, rather than a dominance over me. Shortly after this, I began to have a series of remarkable and actually quite pleasant and healing encounters with them. Although I can't be sure, and none of us really can, in terms of their underlying motives, I came to believe that it was my perception and lack of experimental perspective that was triggering the sometimes extreme emotional response, perhaps not something which they intended to engender. This may be a natural human response when coming into contact with something as literally and figuratively alien as these encounters tend to be. As my perception shifted, so did the quality of my experiences, which opened up a new avenue of equality of communication between us. On one of the next experiences, only a week or two later, I woke up to a gentle and oddly not unpleasant paralysis. I was in the bedroom as early morning light came through the windows. I heard a low to mid frequency humming, accompanied by a strong vibration, as if the whole bed was being shaken, although nothing else in the room appeared to be moving. Living in California, one becomes used to that familiar shaking and rolling which can accompany an earthquake. But this was localized to the bed that I was laying on, while everything else remained still. Nonetheless, it was not alarming, and I could feel what I can only describe as something like a featherweight metallic rolling pin gliding up and down my body, between my waist and my neck, never touching my body, just hovering while scanning me slowly over and over again. As it moved in this continuous up and down pattern, humming while it worked, I had the distinct sense that they were working on me in some way, perhaps trying to help heal me from the long effects of COVID, or perhaps another unrelated medical issue. Healing. Although this was not stated, it was clearly implicit in what they were doing. I tried to look to see who or how many were in the room, but they clearly did not want me distracted by their physical presence and stayed out of my direct line of sight, or simply remained invisible. Perhaps this is partially due to the fact that I have previously asked them not to appear at the foot of my bed, as I still found their physical presence, whatever form that might be, to be disconcerting. To the best of my recollection, I have dealt with at least 5 different species, who, although possibly connected with one another, look entirely different from each other. Some are easier to be in the presence of than others, but I sensed as they were trying to help me, they also knew it could be an unnecessary distraction, and even slightly alarming. if they showed me their physical form in that vulnerable moment. There have been several subsequent encounters since then, all of which have been entirely different in tone and content from so many earlier ones in my life, where I felt I was more of a subject being dispassionately evaluated, even if something positive was occurring. After each of these recent encounters, I have gotten out of bed feeling pretty good, and I have thanked them for the visit and the quality of their interaction. There was one recently which was quite specific in the clear message stated to me. During a recent meditation, they revealed some interesting information to me, starting with viewing things on the microcosmic level. I found myself looking at what appeared to be a single celled organism, as if viewed from the vantage point of a microscope. These organisms were visibly alive and moving and interacting with one another. This gave way to the macrocosmic level, where these single cell organisms were replaced by constellations and star clusters, which felt similarly alive. As an amateur astronomer, some of these were familiar to me, but many of them were in such fine detail and so numerous that I could not clearly identify from where in the observable universe they were having me view this extraordinary spectacle. Next, I was taken back to Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt and shown structures containing hieroglyphic language that was completely unfamiliar. Quickly, following on from that, I was thrust into a completely unfamiliar landscape, but with similar structures and language to what we have come to associate with ancient Egypt. However, the structures built upon this alien terrain were far more elaborate and much more colorful, some structures being a brightly hued blue or red, plus the skies were also an entirely different color than our own. I believe I was being shown some sort of historical blueprint upon which we have based some of these similarly designed ancient structures found on Earth. Finally, I was taken back into the cosmos, looking at a multitude of distant galaxies which we cannot see from Earth. And in this moment, I was surrounded and enveloped by countless otherworldly intelligences who, in referring to consciousness, all consciousness, said to me quite clearly, "This is how we do it." Coming through the crown of my head, as well as what we often refer to as our third eye, was the feeling that all knowledge which was passing through me in this way, through the portal of consciousness, is the means by which it has been passed on through countless billions of souls, elegantly illustrating how all evolved and sentient living beings throughout the cosmos communicate with one another. I could feel the infinite consciousness of love and unity that unites all beings throughout the universe, and it made me suddenly feel completely unafraid about encountering them. During this meditation, I opened myself to them, inviting them in and telling them I was not afraid. My arms reached upwards, with my palms wide open, spreading my fingers apart as far as possible with legs uncrossed, holding my hands palm up. I could see the light of consciousness change and get brighter, and then, when my arms would get tired, I'd bring them down for a while and fold them on my chest, and everything would become a bit more muted again, although still unquestionably alive. Without doubt, there seems to be a direct relationship between opening one's body physically, psychologically, and spiritually, connecting to them through pure consciousness. I deeply believe that this method of perception and communication is what they are trying to cultivate in our world through all the people who wish to use these higher powers within themselves to communicate to all sentient life in the universe. It is absolutely essential that each of us know that it is not necessary to receive permission from any dogmatic, authoritarian body, be it government, science, church, or any specific religious or non religious affiliation. in order to be able to directly communicate with these beings, whether corporal or multidimensional. It is completely individualistic, and every human being already has this capacity hardwired into them. Shamanistic and tribal cultures seem to be innately more connected to that unseen, living part of the universe, far more so than many in the educated and so called developed Western world. Each individual has the power and necessary tools to find their own way, whereby they are able to access this dimension easily and, by extension, access communication with all levels of living intelligence throughout the universe. I believe this is why we are seeing such a noticeable upsurge in sightings and people coming forward with their own personal experiences and encounters with a multitude of different beings. I believe they are now wanting to be seen by many more of us, and they are also learning how they can communicate on a more meaningful and productive level with our species. I strongly feel that this is not exclusive to any one elite group of people, and certainly not the domain of governments and powerful organizations who have different, darker motives at heart. Those interests would prefer that humanity at large not be asking these uncomfortable questions. Yet, we incrementally move toward more universal acceptance and a desire to deeply understand this growing global phenomena. Sadly, I am no longer expecting truthful, full disclosure from those quarters. Ironically, it is no longer necessary. Every living person with an open heart and mindset can bypass this unnecessary, archaic obstacle of authoritarian control. It simply requires raising your antenna. It has recently become a mantra of mine when wanting to connect with the visitors to remember that in essence it can be a very simple and direct path through our consciousness to theirs. This is how they do it. And if we choose, we can too. Signed, a fellow traveler. Thank you, sir, for sharing your experience with us. And thank you for sharing your account with us as well. It takes guts to share your experience, and when you feel ready, I will share your story for you. This is Mary Kachapalya. May love and light be with you.